Chapter 11. Jackson spent Friday poring over Nona's recipe book. He'd never been one to cook over ordering out and didn't have the nerve to attempt one of her signature dishes, as she'd hand-penciled the directions on note cards with vague instructions like, toss in a pinch of oregano. Finally, he settled on an online recipe for fettuccine alfredo that didn't have too many steps. Nona had called the pasta Italian-American food, but she made it often enough for Jackson as a little boy. She'd offered to show him how to make it, but he'd been too lazy at the time. If he could go back, he would have paid attention, washed dishes, done anything if he could be with his warmest, wisest family member again. Now he only hoped he could remember a few of her techniques. D'Angelo chauffeured Jackson to the supermarket, where he picked up mozzarella and prosciutto for an appetizer and flour, eggs, parmigiano, butter, and shallots for the pasta. He knew he had olive oil. Though Jackson was no chef, Nona never would have forgiven him for leaving his pantry bare of that. The girl at the checkout counter raised her eyebrows when she rang up the brand new stand mixer with pasta making implement, but Jackson didn't blink at the total. Back home, he got so worried about messing something up that he called Miss Lewis to enlist her to help with the meal. Even so, Jackson was surprised at how enjoyable the tasks turned out to be, like rolling out dough with his own hands and smelling the aromatic shallots as he whirled them around in oil. It reminded him of a science experiment, getting the consistency of the dough and the sauce just right. Miss Lewis insisted on supervising instead of taking over the hard stuff that wasn't so hard at all, just new. She was nuking Aaron's favorite chicken nuggets in the microwave when she struck up a conversation. You know, D'Angelo took me on a trip to Daytona last weekend. I was surprised since he drives every day for his job, but he said he enjoyed every mile. We had a nice picnic on the beach. I don't suppose you had anything to do with that. Miss Lewis shot him a knowing look. Of course not. Jackson had helped plan the whole thing. He had a way of creating romantic moments, even if D'Angelo had shot down his brilliant dancing class idea. She straightened the collar of Jackson's peach polo. You're all right, kid. By the way, I found a new position. Are you sure that you're leaving town? I'm not sure of anything, Jackson muttered. The microwave timer beeped, and she pulled the steaming plate out by its edges. You seem different now than you did since you first came here. Happier. More settled? I am, but how could he explain why he couldn't settle yet? They both turned to the sound of a sharp rapping on the apartment door. Jackson held his hands up. Please don't say anything to Kaleigh. The housekeeper nodded, but pursed her lips in disapproval. Duke added to the knocking noise with barking, reminding Jackson to grab his leather collar before swinging the door open. Kaleigh wore her hair down straight tonight. It tickled the base of her bare collarbones as she fiddled with the skirt of her sleeveless dress. Cotton, the color of melted butterscotch, floated out from her trim waist and bunched underneath her fingers. We're here, she stated the obvious. You look amazing, Jackson said, and immediately regretted it. Idiot, she doesn't like it when you compliment her. But Kaleigh's lips just curved into a tiny smile. She tucked her hair behind her ears. Can we come in? Of course. He stepped aside. She sniffed. It smells good in here. Do you like Italian? I love it. Jackson exhaled. I hope you still do when you leave. Please have a seat. He leaned down to Duke and said, Behave yourself, making sure that Aaron was safe on the couch before letting the mutt loose to cover the tyke in wet kisses. Miss Lewis appeared with the meat and cheese dish. Aaron! During the Taylors' last visit, Jackson had discovered that the typically stalwart housekeeper had a major soft spot for little ones. She dropped the dish down on the end table. Do you want to take Duke out for a walk while your nuggets cool down? Jackson couldn't help but glance at Kaleigh, whose eyes were glued to the floor. It looked like Miss Lewis was trying to pay him back for setting her up with D'Angelo. Yeah, can I, Mommy? Kaleigh swallowed. Sure. Let me get you something to drink. Jackson wasn't usually flustered around women, but somehow seeing her there on his couch in the fading daylight felt much different than skating together in a public session or hanging out with Aaron. She had to shout after him as he rushed into the kitchen. "Do you have Dr. Pepper?" "I do," he hollered back, already popping the tab and pouring the liquid into a crystal glass. He'd noticed that Kaleigh always brought a bottle of Dr. Pepper mid-shift from the break room vending machine. By the time Jackson took a steadying breath and re-emerged in the living room, Aaron and Miss Lewis were gone. If he would have sat on the armchair catty-cornered from her perch on the couch, it would have felt awkwardly far away, so Jackson slowly took a seat beside Kaleigh. He offered her the glass, anchoring his elbow on his knee to keep it from shaking. Their fingers brushed, and Kaleigh's voice was breathy when she said, "Thank you." The thick silence was broken by a heavy knock. Kaleigh set her glass down on the side table and shifted toward the door. Did they forget something? "I don't think that knocking's for Miss Lewis." The second knock rattled the door's hinges. Jackson's stance was tense as he rose to check the peephole, but his posture melted from protectiveness to fear when he saw who was behind the door. Marcus. Jackson's hand felt thick and clumsy as he unlocked the doorknob and twisted it open. Then he adopted a casual posture, leaning against the doorframe. "Gad, thanks for the notice." "If I'd given it, would you have stuck around?" With no other greeting, Marcus pushed him aside and strode into the room like he owned it, which he did. His eyes landed on Kaleigh unsurprised. "I see you've been passing your time as usual." Jackson straightened. "Now wait 1 minute, Kaleigh." Marcus turned on him and interjected, "I must have missed the change of address card. I had to go through our bank statements to find your apartment name. I don't like wasting time." "I know you don't. So why did you come to see me?" "In the hope that you'd be doing anything other than wasting your time with flings." Marcus and Jackson were dark mirror images staring each other down, from their jet black hair to their olive skin. The hockey star was no slouch when it came to physique, but Marcus was even bigger. His height helped him when he was intimidating his employees. As if he wasn't influential enough in his position, he had to have the physicality to back it up. Jackson hated that they looked alike. "You're a sales associate, Jackson, with low performance reviews to boot? If you were in my region, I would have fired you by now." "They should have some kind of employee confidentiality," Jackson muttered. Marcus must have pulled his hydrangea employee records. "I should have known something was up. You showed interest in working for the company. I humored your need for the shore while you should have been working your way up in the central office, only to find out that you've been still doing absolutely nothing, hiding out in the stockroom like a teenage boy." Marcus's finger stabbed down toward Jackson's chest, but years of fight had caused Jackson to stop reacting. He was now burrowed in the icy recesses of himself that kept his body frozen in place, not able to respond, but also not easily broken. Jackson's voice was cool. "It sounds like I've caused you a lot of embarrassment, but I may not always be here to boss around." Marcus barked out a laugh. "Ooh, going off on your own, huh? I should take you off the accounts right now. Is that what you want?" He took his phone out ready to make the call. Jackson remained rigid, all responses dead in his mouth. "No, that's what I thought. You wouldn't want to do any actual work." He shoved his phone back into his pocket. "You'd better get moving at that store of yours, or you're coming back home." He straightened, now the picture of civility, and nodded at Kaleigh. "Callie," he said, and stalked away. To his left, Jackson saw Kaleigh's jaw drop, and to his right, Marcus slammed the door shut. Jackson chose to focus on the closed door. He didn't want to see Kaleigh looking at him like a weak, helpless loser. It seemed a fitting metaphor for his life. Doors kept closing, blocking out possibilities. Well, not anymore. Marcus thought he knew everything, but he didn't know about Costa Rica. And Jackson wished he could stick around just to see the look on his father's face the moment He realized that his son and his precious legacy was gone forever. Marcus had looked Kaleigh up and down. She knew that look. Utter condescension, like she was the dirt beneath his feet. But she'd balled her fist and clamped her mouth shut, not wanting to give him any more ammunition to the words which implied she did not belong here. She didn't have to prove anything to the likes of him. Jackson faced away from her, shoulders slumped, but he didn't have to be ashamed. He was not defined by his father. She hated when people lumped her and Lana together that way. Still, Marcus's words squeezed like a steel trap around her heart. Flings, he'd said. The word played right into her fears that she was just another girl to Jackson, being taken in by his charm only to be discarded when he grew bored. But Jackson wasn't charming now. He just looked broken, in a way that was painfully familiar to her. Maybe they both had their ways of acting fake, of telling the world that they didn't care what happened to them, since the ones who should have loved them the most didn't. You didn't deserve that, Kaleigh said. Neither did you. He shouldn't have spoken to you that way. Kaleigh shrugged. I'm no stranger to jerks. I guess you aren't. Jackson returned to the couch. He opened his mouth, then seemed to think better of it and snapped it shut. What is it? He shook his head. No, it's none of my business. Kaleigh crossed her arms. Come on, spit it out. Was Aaron's father one of those jerks? Jackson looked both curious and cautious. The biggest. He left you guys? Yes. He wouldn't even stick around for the mother of his child. He was too gutless. She spat the word out like a curse. To even try. I didn't want to be with him, really. I mean, it's not like he was such a winner. I'm angry more than anything. Jackson's fingers brushed hers. He is the one who's missing out. When she didn't pull away, he grasped her whole hand. I wish he was around so I could take a swing at him. It wouldn't do any good. Kaleigh lifted one shoulder. It might for me. Kaleigh smiled at that. It was nice to have someone sticking up for her for once. I wanted Aaron to have a dad, but it's for the best. Aaron should have family that loves and appreciates him, not someone who only loves him when it's convenient. Jackson nodded his agreement. Kaleigh usually avoided talking about Aaron's father, but now that Jackson had tapped that bitter well, all the hatred came spewing out. And you want to know why I don't believe in God? I've lived my entire life subject to every whim of my mother. Then the boy who claimed to love me left at the first sign of trouble. I mean, if God's pulling the strings, how can he expect me to carry on like this? If I hadn't found you, she trailed off. There she went, depending on someone. But if she didn't believe in her heart that he would stay, if she kept her past in the forefront of her mind, maybe she could stay in control. But you did find me. Jackson took her other hand and leaned forward. And you carried on, in whatever way you could. You'll always do that for Aaron. I just wish you could see that you don't have to do it all by yourself. I don't know much about the Bible, about being a good Christian, but I know that my life's gotten better since I started to follow God. Not easier, just more satisfying. He stared at their intertwined fingers, filled with better blessings than I could have hoped to receive. Kaleigh's voice fell to a whisper. This feels too good to be real. Oh, how I want it to be real. Jackson matched her hushed tone. I'm here, he promised. They leaned closer until they heard the doorknob turn. Always interrupted, Jackson said, but as he leaned back and slid his fingers from hers, his grin let her know he wasn't frustrated. Her son wasn't a burden. He was a blessing. They turned to face the door and put all the earlier unpleasantness behind them. Dinner passed without another hitch, but the apartment seemed so empty once everyone went home. The quiet hummed, hemming Jackson in. until he turned on the flat screen in the bedroom to stay distracted. As the football announcers blared, he slid into his pajama pants, turned off the light, and crawled into bed. Still, the familiar fear that he wouldn't be able to fall asleep plucked at his chest. He snapped his eyes open, shut the game off, and used his phone to play one of those cheesy, deep-breathing audio clips with the wind chimes and the birds chirping instead. He didn't put on any covers because he could hear Duke's collar jingling as the dog trotted across the apartment. Once Duke turned the corner into Jackson's room, he jumped up and sidled next to Jackson in bed. Then there was no need for additional warmth. When the feel of Duke's bristly fur and heavy breathing fused with the soft hum of the narrator's voice, Jackson faded into sleep. Jackson punched the accelerator down, the pavement like his racetrack, until he saw the car that he hadn't noticed before. His foot slammed the brake pedal to the floor, but the reaction was too late. As he hurtled closer, the other driver came into view. Jackson's headlights glinted off her hair, but instead of being a pale blonde color like in his usual nightmare, the driver's hair was a fiery red. Kaleigh's blue eyes widened just before Jackson's vehicle smashed into hers, crushing her in its destruction. Jackson thrashed backwards, not into the headrest of his car, but into his pillow. The motion jarred him awake. Duke whined, unhappy that Jackson disturbed his snooze, and leapt off the bed. Jackson sat up and shook the sleep out of his arms, not wanting to risk a return to the nightmare. Logically, he knew that his fear of hurting Kaleigh had mingled with his old memories of the accident, but the paralysis he felt was identical to that horrible day. He had been frozen, too afraid to make a move that would create more problems. God, he prayed, running his fingers through his hair. Please make it clear what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what's right anymore. Isaac's charge not to wait too long resounded in Jackson's mind, but he shoved the thought back down. It's too soon to talk to Kaleigh. She won't understand. Visualizing how that conversation would go was almost worse than the thought of getting back behind the wheel. Jackson's stomach churned as fast as his newsstand mixer when he imagined the hurt and betrayal he'd witness in Kaleigh's eyes, or worse, the same cool detachment he'd only recently got rid of. The Costa Rica topic was not helping him relax. He would be a mess tomorrow if he kept this line of thinking going. Jackson decided to push his earbuds in and go for a midnight run. Maybe he could run hard enough to escape the truth. He couldn't delay a fallout much longer.